So my name's Ed Ripic, we partner with Williams Edsall Land Surveyors, and there's a lot of discussion about insurance agents and mortgage companies and flood insurance. Our part in this whole process is we provide the elevation certificate for the homeowner, and an elevation certificate is assigned to a structure, a building. In most cases, it's a home. We did one yesterday in Newark Valley for a garage that was behind the house. And a lady was applying for a home equity loan. We had done an elevation certificate on her home. It was removed from the flood zone, but her house or her garage was considered in a flood zone, so we did an elevation certificate yesterday on the garage. So when we come in to do an elevation certificate, it's the one thing that we do where we actually have to go into the home. So we need to make arrangements with a realtor to give us access to the key into the house if it's a vacant house, or the homeowner or a representative of them, so we can get in and make the measurements that we need to make. So when should you get an elevation certificate? Well, if you're in a flood zone and you're going to pay flood insurance, you're going to, you might want to look into an elevation certificate, which can have a positive impact on the rates that you're quoted from your insurance agent. Once we provide an elevation certificate to a homeowner, and then they take that to their insurance agent, and often we email those in a PDF form to the agent for the client, we really don't know what goes on after that. They go back and forth with their insurance agent. So any of those types of questions, you're going to have to revert to Jim. So one of the things we're going to do is look for the lowest floor elevation, and that's a basement or crawl space. We document that on the elevation certificate. We document the first floor. And then we also document all the infrastructure of the house, such as the hot water heater, the furnace, central air, electric panel, all those types of features will be on the elevation certificate. How many of you have seen an elevation certificate and looked at it with any kind of detail? Okay, probably half of you. How about a LOMA? Have any of you been involved with a LOMA? Okay. All right. So this line item here, no way to know until an elevation certificate is done. I would say that majority of our phone calls are from existing homeowners who got a letter from FEMA that said their rates are going up, and unless they get an elevation certificate, it's going to go up 18 to 25% or something along that line. The elevation certificate can help that. The other is a prospective buyer who's buying a home. They've gone to the mortgage company. They've been identified as in a flood zone. They get a quote for their insurance, and I don't know if I can afford this. They call us about getting an elevation certificate and see if that's going to help their rates. So, but until we do that elevation certificate, there's no way to know. When we're called to do an elevation certificate, one of the first things we look at is whether that home is in a zone that has a base flood elevation published on the firm maps. And as mentioned earlier, we can only go by what's legally respected by FEMA, which is in Broome County, the 1970s/80s maps. Keep in mind that without trying to get too technical, those maps are on a respected datum of 1929, which is a datum that was established, as you can imagine, in the 1920s. It was the respected datum by NGS, the National Geodetic Survey, for many, many years. So the current maps for Broome County are on 1929 vertical datum. The new maps that are adopted, say in Tioga County, they are on a 1988 datum, the North American vertical datum of 1988. Again, adopted by NGS several years ago. There's about 7 inches different. So when we come in to do an elevation certificate, one of the things we have to be very careful of is that the elevations we provide on that certificate are comparing apples to apples, that there's 1988 datum or 1929 datum. Not to confuse it even more, but NGS is coming out with a 2020 datum very shortly, which I'm going to a conference on next week. So that may change things even more. So as far as the elevation certificate used for rating, again, that's once we provide that to the client, they take that to their insurance agent and they get rated. The elevation certificate does need to be filled out by a licensed surveyor and signed and dated and sealed. An incorrect elevation certificate can be very expensive, and we try very diligently to do an accurate job on all our elevation certificates. We do a fair amount of them between Broome and Tioga County. As you can imagine, Tioga County had a major flooding events just like Broome. We've worked with a lot of homeowners in New York Rising that raised their houses. So we've got a lot of experience working with these. I guess go to the next one. I think, so this is an elevation certificate. The front page, you probably can't read much of that, but the top portion is basically information about the house, the homeowner, the address, tax map, latitude and longitude, so that the FEMA, when they get this, they can plug that into their system and zoom right in on that house. And then there's information about the dwelling kind of in the middle of that page. FEMA has a list of building diagrams that we have to apply that particular building diagram number in the elevation certificate, whether it's a slab on grade, whether it's a foundation, a full concrete foundation, whether it's a crawl space. So we add that, whether it's attached garage or detached garage. There's a number of different building diagrams. So we add that in. And then down here is where you'll see the base flood elevation on those elevation certificates. That's the number you want to look at that says that's what the 100-year flood, and I dare say 100-year flood, but that's the base flood elevation. And we calculate that by a couple of different means when we're evaluating a piece of property or a house. When we do that, one is the firm map that you've probably all seen in the formats that you can create on FEMA's Map Center website, and it has little squiggly lines that like 830 feet. And that's showing you what the base flood elevation. Well, those numbers are plus or minus 9/10 of a foot. So you have to keep in mind, we're going to publish that number. That number is a calculated number based on the firm map and the flood insurance study, which is provided for each county. In that flood insurance study, they'll have a number of different hydrological studies on that floodway for that property, whether it's a creek or the Susquehanna River. And we analyze that information to calculate what that base flood elevation is for that particular house. And then at the bottom, we state what datum that's on, as I was describing earlier, whether it's 29 or 88 datum. So now we get into sort of the real important numbers as it pertains to that house. The top portion of that elevation certificate will list the elevations of the top of the bottom floor, the top of the next floor above that. In most cases, you have a basement. It may be finished, it may not. We document that elevation. Then you have your first floor. We'll document that on there as well. Then we'll document elevations around the building, the highest adjacent grade, which is the highest grade that touches the foundation of the building. We'll document that on there. Then we have a lowest adjacent grade, which is the lowest grade that touches the foundation of the building. There's another lowest adjacent grade, which is any structure that is attached to the building and its lowest grade. So if you have a house and you have a deck and a set of stairs that goes down, then we locate a grade shot at the bottom of those steps. And I think things are a little different now. I've done a number of these on Cuga Lake, and I've actually seen where a house was on the cliff of Cuga Lake, if you're familiar with that had a deck off the house and a set of stairs that went down 60 feet to the lake, and the was classified in the flood zone. Yeah, if that floods, we're all in trouble. So it's crazy, but I've seen it, and I've actually seen where homeowners have had to go and literally cut the connection between the house and the deck, just to remove that. So the lowest adjacent grade, we have to locate it. That's what's guideline. Then at the bottom, of course, is where we sign it, seal it, and date it. And again, and then I don't have any other pages, but the next pages would include pictures of the structure. So we take 3 or 4 or 5 pictures of the structure, we put those on, and then we print, sign those, and provide those to the client. And like I said, in a lot of cases, we'll get the email address of your insurance agent, and we forward that on so that they can start processing those numbers as quickly as they can. Because they're trying to close on a house, they've got closing deadlines, and so we try to get that done as quickly as we can for them. As I mentioned earlier, with the elevation certificate, for one of the first things we look at is there a base flood elevation for that structure. When you're in an urban area or along the river, there's usually a base flood elevation. So we can fill out, if you go back one page, we can fill out that base flood elevation on there, and then that tells everybody where the building is structure-wise relative to that flood boundary. But if you're in the outlying areas and there's just a creek that goes by and there's a shaded area along that creek that shows a flood boundary, but there's no elevation associated with that flood boundary, we can't calculate what that is. You can hire engineers to do that, but it's very, very expensive. In those cases, what we'll do is we'll establish the elevation of the house and the lowest and highest adjacent grades and all the features we were talking about earlier. Then the homeowner can have us do a LOMA, which is a letter of map amendment application with FEMA. It's something that does not have to be done by a licensed surveyor. However, in 100% of the cases when I've suggested a homeowner if they want to do it themselves, they don't want to do it, and I don't blame them. It's on their website, FEMA's website. You create a login and password, like most things, and you start answering all the questions about that property. And then towards the end, we upload a number of supporting documents for that, which would be a PDF of the elevation certificate, tax map, deed, survey map, the firm map that's associated with that property. All that information gets uploaded. We send it off to them, and then we wait 30 to 60 days. And we get an email back from FEMA with a letter of determination that states whether that building was removed or not removed from the flood insurance or from the special flood hazard area. And in a lot of cases, I had a client out in Shenango. They had a home they were going to sell. There was a small creek behind their house. It was less than 100 feet from their home. They didn't have a mortgage, so they didn't pay flood insurance, but they were going to sell their home, wanted to see what flood insurance was going to be for a prospective buyer. They were being proactive. So we did an elevation certificate for them, then went ahead and did a LOMA for them, and it turns out the house was removed from the flood insurance, or from the flood zone. So they were able to show that to their realtor and to a prospective buyer. Now they can go ahead and purchase that home without the requirement of the flood insurance. And that's really, in a nutshell, what we do. Any questions?
When the homeowner or you is filing for the LOMA,
Pardon me?
when the homeowner or yourself is filing for the LOMA, you said something about surveying that. Does the boundaries actually have to be?
They don't have to be. If there's one on record, then FEMA wants to see it.
Everybody hear that question?
No.
If there's he asked if we have to have a survey map. No, it's whatever's on file in public
When applying
record.
for a LOMA, do you need a survey map of the entire parcel?
No. The only time you do is if you're applying for a LOMA to remove a parcel of land. If you have a vacant lot and it's partially in or out of the flood zone, and you want to parcel off a couple acres to your grandson or something like that, you can do but you do need a survey for that with a meets and bounds description and try to get that removed from the flood zone.
One more question.
Sure.
Do you take into consideration water well and septic
No.
on these site elevations?
Repeat the question.
The well or the septic, no, we don't take that into consideration. No.
I'll lead off with the easy question first. I
Okay.
got two for you. One, what is the cost based on for elevation certificates for anybody who doesn't know?
Typical cost is $500 for an elevation
Is it
certificate.
based on the size of the lot, or is it just $500?
It's just, but time, really. Our equipment, we have to come in, establish an elevation, and make all our measurements, and then fill out the elevation certificate.
And the other is if we're selling land to somebody who's a prospective builder, they want to build their own home on the lot, should we direct them to get an elevation certificate at that phase, or should we leave that on the architect or PE?
You can, they're called elevation certificates of design, and if you go back to the other, yeah. Go to the next page. Yeah, right here it says construction drawings, building under construction, or finished construction. So we would check off on there whether it's, you know, whether it's a proposed elevation for the first floor, then they can start their construction, and then when they're done, we have to come in and finalize that elevation certificate and do a as-built, and then they can get their CO.
Can you get a Loma by elevating the house above the high water mark?
Well, that depends on the house type of structure. And, yeah, elevating a home in a flood zone is not that simple. There's a lot of things that go into it. If you're gonna elevate it, you have to put certified flood vents in. We carry booklets with us in the truck, so if there are flood vents, we have to take pictures of them. We have to document the square inches of coverage that they have and how many there are, and the elevation of them relative to the exterior grade. They have to be within 1 foot of the exterior grade.
Last question, one more question.
Mine's a two-parter. The FEMA flood maps, when they show the lines with the squigglies and all that.
Yep.
862 feet, is that edge to edge?
The lines on an elevation certificate or on a firm map are basically an elevation line. We're all used to looking at a map and seeing boundary lines or tax maps or, you know, Google Maps where you've got streets and things are pretty cut and dry. But the firm maps are actually an elevation that they're trying to outline. So that's why you get a lot of these sort of gray areas where somebody says, I'm in a flood zone or not in a flood zone. My house is outside this line that's on this map, but that line is a very vague elevation that they're trying to digitize, basically.
But I've seen them where they have a line that goes 862 feet, you know, from one point to another. And part two is the elevation certificate that you do. What's the point that you're using as a starting point? Elevation above what? Sea level?
Sea level. Yep, sea level. Right now, we have very high-end GPS equipment, so we can bring in elevations right on the site, no matter where you are, as long as we have cell coverage. And, yeah, we establish an elevation and start doing our thing.
All right, thank you, Ed. Appreciate it.